On the morning of Saturday, February 8th, 2014, my world came crashing down around me. In an instant, my life was forever changed, and I learned that there is indeed a business to everything, including the business of death. The business of death is unforgiving and relentless. It doesn't care that my mind may be numb or my heart broken into a million pieces. And it didn't matter that my insides were cold and hollow. No, the only thing that mattered was that there was business to be taken care of. The first order of business started only hours after we learned that my sweet, funny, and incredibly talented and beautiful daughter was gone at the young age of 23. As my family gathered around the dining room table to write the obituary, it was incomprehensible to me how I could sum up my precious child's life in 4 brief paragraphs. But that's what we did. And then the funeral director turned to me and gently asked, "Mrs. Bradley, will we be filing any life insurance?" And just like that, the next piece of business was ready to be taken care of. He was kind and offered to file the claim for us, but as an office administrator, I knew that I needed to take care of this myself. You see, I work in the dental front office. I've been practice administrator for almost 20 years. I'm well familiar with the process of filing a claim, and this would most definitely be the most important claim that I would ever file, because this one was personal. However, I wouldn't be filing this claim today because my insurance carrier was closed on the weekend. There was no emergency number to call. And somehow or another, this just didn't seem like the type of message that I should leave on a machine. So I would have to wait until Monday to file my claim. And on Monday morning, when I was finally able to make that phone call, I dialed the number and I listened to a series of automated prompts. Press 1 if you have an existing policy. Please press 2 if you know the person that you wish to speak to. Press 3 to file a claim. I couldn't have heard that correctly, I thought to myself. There's no way that my daughter's life is somehow or another associated with the number 3. So I waited, because this is what I do. I know that they'll repeat the last command. And then the voice came back on. Please press 3 to file a claim. So I pressed the number 3, and I waited for someone to answer the phone. And while I waited, I realized that although automated services surely have their place, I use them every day in the dental office. I verify benefits, I file claims, I confirm appointments. They should never take the place of communicating with our patients, or in this case, our customers, on something so important. I eventually got to speak to someone, and I filed my claim. But I was left feeling so completely numb, I think is a good way to explain it by the experience. I started my business several years ago, and I started it with this grand idea that I was going to explain to dental office teams how they can take care of their daily tasks and still focus on the patient. How important it was to keep the patient at the forefront of everything that we do. But now, with this one simple and yet incredibly profound change, I knew that communication is where my topic needs to lie. Because you know what? Shifts happen. Now that's shift. That's shift with an F. What are shifts? Shift is when something happens that immediately forces you to stop what you're doing and refocus your life or retrace your steps. Maybe it's a simple shift. Maybe you're walking out the door and you spill your coffee down your freshly clean suit and you've got to go change clothes. You've got to stop what you're doing and you have to go change clothes. Maybe it's a little bit more complicated. Maybe you're driving down the road heading into the office and you get a flat tire. And you have to pull over to the side of the road and change that tire. You have to stop and change that tire before you can go to work. Or God forbid, it is an incredibly life-changing shift. It doesn't really matter. Shifts happen. And when they do, they affect our lives, they affect how we feel about our lives, and they affect how we feel about others and how we communicate with others. And we need to be able, as the front office or any team member in the dental front office, we need to be able to recognize what's going on around us and communicate accordingly. I went back to work a week after my daughter's accident. And my team, because they know me so well, was able to help me when I couldn't communicate the way I should. They saw when perhaps I wasn't 100% there, and they stepped in for me. They communicated with me without ever saying a word. They understood. And while I know that's because they know me so well, it doesn't take that much effort to get to know our patients and to understand when they're going through their own shifts. To listen to what they're telling us and to respond accordingly. Let me give you another example of that. 3 weeks after Elena's accident, my husband and I came home from work one Friday afternoon, and while we were going through the mail, we found a letter from the Mississippi Department of Transportation, or MDOT. It was addressed to Elena, and we opened it up and read it. And we were amazed, quite honestly. It seems that Elena had been involved in an automobile accident. And at the time of the accident, she failed to show proof of insurance. So her driver's license was being suspended. And if she were to be caught driving with a suspended driver's license, it was a misdemeanor. Now, what I didn't mention to you earlier is that Elena's accident killed her instantly. And the Mississippi Highway Patrolman that responded to the accident pronounced her dead at the scene. And what I believe my husband and I both assumed, incorrectly, but we assumed, was that if the Mississippi Highway Patrolman declared her deceased at the time of the accident, and he works for the Mississippi Department of Transportation, that they would communicate that to one another, much like the dentist communicates with the assistant or the office manager communicates with the patient coordinator. We assume that we're all communicating what's happening, what's going on in our practice, in our fields. Well, obviously, as I said, we assumed incorrectly. So it was Friday afternoon, and MDOT had already closed. So my husband and I had the extreme pleasure of holding on to this anger the entire weekend. And I don't know if you've ever held on to anger or not, but typically what it does, it grows. So by the time Monday morning came and I went back to the office, I was pretty much a loaded time bomb, ready to explode. So when I got into the office, my team, who is very well at reading me, we communicate, knew that something was wrong. And when they asked, they got more than they ever bargained for, I'm sure, as I went off on them about this letter that we had received over the weekend. And I couldn't wait, I told them, to be able to call MDOT and give them a piece of my mind. And my patient coordinator, who I must admit, it had to have taken a lot of nerve, for lack of a better word, to approach me. But she did. And she said, Lisa, I need to tell you something. And I'm like, okay. She said, Lisa, you know how when I'm getting ready to call a dental carrier and I'm upset because they denied a claim for lack of information and I know we sent it, or they're requesting additional information that I know I put the attachment on when I filed it electronically, and you remind me not to take it out on the person who answers the phone because they're not the ones who sent the denial? And I said, yes. I knew where she was going with this. She said, well, maybe you need to remember that before you call MDOT. And that's all she said. She smiled at me a little, and I smiled back, and I said, okay. I mean, she had a very good point, didn't she? It's not the person who answers the phone's fault. So I took a deep breath, and I, calmed down a little. But once again, remember, I had all weekend to let this anger build. One little squirt of water was not going to get rid of this inferno that was building up inside of me. But divine intervention took care of the inferno, because although I tried calling all day, I always got a busy signal. The phone never actually rang until 4:30. And honestly, at the point that it rang, I just figured that they were already gone for the day, and that's why I was getting through. But it wasn't. Someone answered the phone, a young woman, and after she said her introduction, she asked how she could help me. And by now I'm much calmer, so I told her who I was and explained about the letter that my daughter received. And I explained to her that Elena was no longer with us. And when I was all finished, I asked her, and ma'am, I'm not really sure what I need to do with this. And the woman on the other end of the line, in this very brusque voice, replied to me, well, ma'am, you're just going to need to send us a copy of that death certificate. What? For what? This is what I'm thinking. If you catch Elena driving on the road with that suspended driver's license, please send me that letter. I want that letter. But I didn't say that. I remembered to stay calm. Of course, it helped that my doctor was standing there watching me, so I was on good behavior. So I nicely asked, why would you need a copy of that, ma'am? And she replied, well, ma'am, that's just what you're going to need to do, and I'm sorry for your condolences. Say what? You're sorry for what? I kid you not, those were her words. She was sorry for my condolences. I'm keeping my calm, taking my deep breaths. Doctor's standing there watching me. So I very nicely, in my best office managerial voice, and with the sweetest southern accent that I can fake, because as you can tell, I'm not originally from the South, I tell this woman that I'm so grateful for her time and have a nice day. And I hang up the phone. So my doctor looks at me and he said, "Is everything okay?" And I smiled. I said, "Yes, yes it is. But I really want to call back." But he said, "No, no calling back. You're good, Lisa. You did what you needed to do." Now, had this woman really listened to what I was telling her, perhaps she could have said something like, "Well, ma'am, I'm so sorry for your loss, but you'll need to send us a copy of that death certificate." And maybe then I would have been inclined to send it. But as it stands right now, 19, 20 months later, they have still not received a copy of that death certificate, and they will not from me. Because I don't feel that it's necessary, and she didn't take the time to communicate to me why the need was there. Communication is so important in everything that we do, in every aspect of business, whether it's the business of life, the business of death, or the business of dentistry. Communication is vital to how we get new patients, keep new patients, and keep existing patients coming back to our practices. Today, we are going to talk about communicate, coordinate, and collect keys to a successful dental practice. And in my humble opinion, communication is the glue that holds the other two keys together. With these keys, we can have successful dental practices if we will just speak and listen in such a way that lets our patients know they are number one. So won't you join me as I tell you a little bit more about who I am and what I do, and how we can use these keys to have the successful dental practice that we are all working for.